The 7Artisans 85mm f1.8 lens for the Nikon Z system. 7Artisans did send me this lens to try out and make the video on based on my collaboration terms. I have the official Nikon 85mm f1.8 to compare this lens to, but obviously this is significantly lower cost. So is it similar? We'll find out. Let's take a look. Aspects of this lens: it is a metal build quality, has a metal mount, it's a USB port for potential firmware updates in the future, manual focus ring, aperture ring, and also autofocus manual focus switch that works similarly to the Nikon lens, has a good click to it, and you're not going to accidentally change it most likely. Plus a custom button on the side. The official Nikon lens does not have the custom button or the aperture ring, and it's going to be the fourth one in the first column. Now when I press the side button, jumps directly to the My Menu setting in the camera. The 7Artisans lens has a 62mm filter thread, and the Nikon lens has a 67mm. 452 grams in weight for the 7Artisans compared to 470 of the Nikon. They're both internal focusing. The adjustment rings on the 7Artisan are electronic. They're not mechanical. There is a fair amount of force required to rotate them. The aperture ring has a little click on it near the A setting, which if you want to just use controls on the camera, set it to A. But otherwise you can adjust aperture with that ring. I don't know if you'd want a declicked aperture a lot of the time, but it's at least an option on the lens if you're into that type of thing. The close focus on both lenses is the same according to their specs, 2.62 feet or 0.8 meters. The 7Artisans lens has an 11 bladed aperture. The Nikon lens has 9, and it is noticeable in some of my test photos. The Nikon lens has a weather gasket in the back mount area. The 7Artisans lens does not have that. I did take this lens out to a local Japanese style garden to see what it's like in use. Very pleasant experience. Autofocus is nice. I didn't notice any issues related to that. It's quick, it's accurate as far as I can tell on the Nikon Z5. Tried to take a bunch of photos throughout various aperture ranges to see if there's any difference just in standard everyday photography. Good amount of detail from this lens in the center. Flare and sun stars. You will see some decent sun stars from this lens at smaller apertures. When you do have that strong light coming into the lens, you will see the actual elements show up in the photo. That's pretty usual, pretty standard for any lens depending on lighting conditions. It's not super distracting in this case. Focusing on a piece of the bridge and in the backgrounds, you can take a look and see if it looks pleasing to you. You know, it's based on personal preference, but yeah, check it out. In the case of these garden photos, I was definitely very focused on going through the aperture range. Interesting information, so I didn't really focus on the aesthetics of my photos doing that. But you can take a look and see what I got as I go through the images. This focal length isn't the most amazing for standard nature photography and stuff like that. I did do some indoor tests as well as a few portraits to get an idea of what it looks like in those situations. F1.8 in the center, I really don't notice any difference at 100%. They're very close. They both look nice, and my focus does look correct in this case. Looking at bokeh of these two lenses at f1.8, obviously given the distance to the subject, they both look pretty nice. I would say maybe the 7Artisan lens has a little bit more of a cat's eye effect to that background. Point source lights look smooth. There might be a bit more texture in the 7Artisans point source lights than the Nikon lens, but besides that, very similar. At f1.8, focusing on the side of the image on this bag, this is where you start to notice the differences between the two lenses. There is more detail for the Nikon lens. Is it a huge amount? No, but it is noticeable, at least in my tests. There is more definition to the flag itself. See more texture to it on the Nikon lens. It has more detail. Is it a huge amount? I don't know. It depends on you and your preferences, but also consider the price difference. With the portrait photos at f1.8, this is especially challenging considering I'm moving around. It's very difficult to get similar focus with these portrait photos on the Z5. However, these two images seem to be pretty close. I did increase exposure in post a little bit so we can see more of that detail when we zoom in. At f1.8, right at the eye where it focused, they both look very nice. Don't see much of a difference in the center of the frame on the eye. Zooming into 300%, they both look good, no issues. If your goal is portraits, having a person's face right in the center is usually what you're going to do. In this case, I really don't notice much of a difference in image quality between the two lenses. I would say that the 7Artisans lens, at least in my few tests here, focus accuracy seems the same, if not slightly better than the Nikon lens. but obviously that comes down to the camera itself. A lot of the time with the Z5, it's not perfect. At f2.8, similar situation. Both look very nice in the center. Taking a look at the bokeh at f2.8, similar situation. Although in this case, I would say that the point source lights are a little bit more round on the 7Artisans lens compared to the Nikon lens. Focusing on the side of the image, in this case at f2.8, similar situation to 1.8. The Nikon lens is giving more detail. Jumping to 300% on this Batman logo. Yeah, you can see a difference. It looks a little bit darker on the edges, so that probably indicates more vignetting. I think the focus was slightly off on the Nikon Z 85mm compared to the 7Artisans. At f5.6 in the center, more of the same basically. Both look good, so close that it's hard for me to tell if there is any difference. Looking at the bokeh at 5.6, both look fine, but you can see rounder point source lights on the 7Artisans lens compared to the Nikon lens. Considering the aperture differences, one has 11 blades, one has 9 blades. So the 7Artisans lens actually has a benefit here. You can definitely tell a difference in this little one here on the bottom. It's not as round on the Nikon lens. Looking at focus on the sides of the image between the two lenses at f5.6, zooming into 300%, and this character's face, you can see more detail on the Nikon lens compared to the 7Artisans lens. Consistent performance throughout the range of apertures. I did do some autofocus tests indoors, simply moving in and out of frame. Gonna let you take a look at those and see if you notice any difference. Autofocus, at least for me with photography, was fine. I didn't notice any issues with the lens. Worked well, focused accurately on the Z5. Standout features of this lens, I'd say, is the custom button on the side. If you wanted an aperture ring, you've got it. I'd say that the hood is potentially a bit undersized, at least compared to the Nikon lens, but does that make any difference in practice? I don't know. So the question is it worth spending a lot more for the official Nikon lens compared to the 7Artisan lens? That's going to be dependent on your personal preferences. If you want the weather gasket in the back, if you want the best optical quality on the sides of the image, consider the official lens. But if you are okay with very nice optical quality in the center and decent optical quality on the sides, but you also want a function button on the camera, you want the aperture ring, consider the 7Artisans lens. And you're going to save quite a bit of money in the process. Again, 7Artisans sent me this lens to try out, make the video on based on my collaboration turns. Hope you enjoyed the video. Scott Photography Bonsai, thanks.